All right, welcome everybody. Watch the participants kind of roll into the room. I wish I could see everybody's face on these things. It's always like just me and you talking to each other, but we know there's another 100 people sitting on the sidelines watching us communicate back and forth. So we'll see get the room kind of filled up. I'll do a quick introduction, Kaihan, and then we'll get rolling pretty quickly after that. So I've been looking for some way to get a haircut. One of my coaches this morning said, he cut his own hair this weekend. I'm like, how the hell did you cut your own hair this weekend? My hair's going to be as long as yours by the time.
No, I don't know what to do. That's one of the unexpected consequences of COVID.
Yeah. I mean, every day I get up, I'm like, oh my gosh, this thing is just getting out of control.
I know.
All right. So we got about 50 participants right now, and they're still rolling in. I'll give you just a really quick introduction. We will record this and we will do a recap. So we'll put a blog post up on the website, which we'll link to, as well as the recap that goes out to you. So you'll see that in your inbox, probably in today, first of day tomorrow. So you will get a recording of this as well. And then we do have something kind of cool happening in the background today. So Kristen McLean is with us. You won't see her on the screen, but she's in the background right now. And if you've been to one of those conferences or one of those meetings where they draw the cool graphics up on a big screen, and it's kind of a visual representation of what was presented in the day. So Kristen is in the background doing that for us right now. So we're really happy to have her and really appreciative. Her website, if you'd like to check that out, is thevividinkcompany.com, thevividinkcompany.com. And I'll put that in the recap as well. And again, Kristen, thanks for doing that. We at Petra Coach have been obviously coaching companies through strategic plannings and scaling up for many years. And we've had to pivot our own organization just over the last few weeks to do different work, obviously work like this, all virtual now. And we've segmented things out into these categories known as DSRO, defense, like you got to play defense, had to play a lot of it, week one. Stabilization. So what are the things you put in place to get stabilized? And then moving into reset. So what are you going to reset towards? How do you rebound on the other side in a better place than you were when you went in? And then playing offense, right? So this kind of pivot point in the middle between, all right, we kind of got our shit together. We're not going nuts right now. And we need to get to offense. So that pivoting piece is very critical right now. And I'm excited to have Kaihan with us today. Quick introduction. If you don't know Kaihan, expert in strategy and innovation. 5 books written on the subject. I'm sure we'll talk about those just a little bit because those are really, really well done. And we first met, I think, at the EMP program, or back in the day, the Birthing a Giants program at MIT many years ago. And you still continue to speak at that. And I've gotten invited back to speak at it as well. So that's a really, really cool thing. He's going to talk to us today about how the secret of success for companies is not that they have a winning strategy or business model. It is how they are able to pivot their strategy and business model in the face of change. So I think that's exactly where we are right now, the face of change. Most companies have gotten defense kind of squared away. Some of them have gotten to stabilization or figuring stabilization out, and they're really curious about this kind of reset and pivot phase. So I'm happy that you're here with us. I've seen you many times. I love it every single time because it makes me think a little bit differently. So I'll turn it over to you and you can take the floor. Oh, by the way, Q&A, please put your questions in the Q&A box. We want it just to be interactive, and as they pop up, I'll jump in and ask those. So without further ado, Kaihan.
All right, great. Well, it's great to be here, and I do think that this is an exciting moment and scary moment, but for those of us who sees this crisis as an opportunity, we can come out stronger, better, faster. So I have more slides here than we have time for. We can kind of present for 20 minutes, and then we can poke around and go to different parts of the framework and presentation. But I'd like to propose that right now is the opportunity to outthink the competition. That's the title of my second to last book, Outthink the Competition. And it is basically what I did was I looked at how do great business people think, talk about how they think. And they all talk about this idea of outthinking the competition. This is Ray Kroc, founder of modern day McDonald's. And he said, my attitude was that the competition can try to copy my style, but they can't read my mind. So I'll leave them a mile and a half behind. So I'd like you to think about the business not as having some unique asset that you can implement that others can't implement, not doing something that you can do that they can't do, but it's always instead, it's something that others choose not to do. It's not that you can't do it, it's that they choose not to do it, and we may choose not to do it. Google could have purchased, Microsoft could have purchased Google. Blockbuster could have purchased Netflix, right? But they chose not to do it. So what we want to get in is what is it that stops great ideas from being ones that we adopt or that our competitors adopt? And this is where disruption comes from. That this is Gandhi, and he said when he, his mission was to get colonial Britain out of India, and his approach was first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, and then you win. So what he's saying is we need to do something that others who would copy us or resist us or fight us, instead they ignore us. So then we can grow it. Then they laugh at us and we're continuing to grow it. And by the time they wake up and say, hey, wait a second, that strategy is actually going to work, it's too late, you've already won. Today we call that disruptive innovation. Today we might call that blue ocean. 2,500 years ago, Sun Tzu, the Chinese general that wrote The Art of War, he called it taking whole, which is you step in and your enemy lets you take them whole. There's no loss, there's no bloodshed. There's one strategic concept. It's been around for millennia. We've just changed. We've called it over the years. And I think a really helpful phrasing of what we're looking for here is the fourth option. And that basically says it's a metaphor that says there's a point at which others stop thinking. When in the face of this crisis, they want to turn to what they've done before, right? They say, well, I've been in this business for 20 years and what you need to do is A, B, C. Or I've solved this, I've dealt with this kind of problem before and what you need to do is 1, 2, 3. And what that means is that they've stopped looking for new options. And now is the time to look for new options. This pattern, when the rules change, who adopts the new fourth option that's made possible by the rules is the source of all competitive advantages. For example, before 1968, there were 3 ways to jump over a high bar. You always did either a scissor, straddle, or roll, all forward techniques. And then Dick Fosbury famously goes over the high bar backward. Now, what's interesting about this is that the technology that made this possible, meaning putting pads on the other side of the high bar, was already implemented 15 years before. In the 1950s, they started putting pads on the other side of the high bar. So it's about adapting more quickly to changes in the rules. If we look at the NBA, if we look at the average height of the last 5 NBA MVPs, most valuable players. So I went in 1960, I looked at who were the last 5 MVPs. Their average height was a little over 80 inches. And if we look at the trend, we see for 2.5 decades, they're getting taller and taller and taller. And then something happens just around 1980s when the rules changed and they started getting shorter. So my first question is, maybe you could just type this into the chat here. What changed, do you think, that the best basketball players started getting shorter? If you just type that into the chat. Exactly. Yep. Gary Rettman, the 3-point line. Joel, the 3-point line. So 1979, they draw a 3-point line, and you get 3 points instead of 2 points if you start shooting from there. And so what that creates is that there is all this uncertainty in our businesses, right? And these are trends that have actually been underway already for a long time. I'm just going to kind of quickly throw these guys up here. So we've got all of these different trends that have been impacting all of our businesses: Internet of Things, new regulations, personalization, data, AI, and now we have the big COVID in the middle of that, right? And so the question is, how do we want to respond to that? Do we want to be a thinker, which is to continue thinking using the thought patterns that have been working for us or not working for us? Or do we want to be an outthinker, right? Do we want to start going over, do we want to start doing layups? Do we want to learn the 3-point? Do we want to keep going over forward, or do we want to learn the new approach? So how do we find these fourth options? Because they're available to us. It's just that they're inconsistent with what we've been doing before. They are psychological barriers that prevent us from shifting our thinking. And so I want to walk you through 3 steps that we can take now and apply them to our businesses. I think you could do this in half a day. You know, maybe with one of your Petra coaches, you can sit down and work through this. And in a very short period of time, you can find a fourth option for you. And these 3 steps are, my methodology has 5 steps. I'm simplifying it, you know, for us now because we have to move quickly. And the first step is to explore an unexpected leverage point. Then the next step is to brainstorm options. And then the third step is to select your fourth option. So let me first talk to you about these leverage points, okay? If we look at Apple's revenue from the time it was founded in the 1970s, you see it, they don't start really scaling until 2003 or 2002. They learned a trick there. And Amazon learned this trick much earlier. If we line up their revenue and 0 is the point at which they were founded, we can see that Amazon started scaling much more quickly. And what the trick is to not look only at our core product or service, but look all around our product or service, at all of the leverage points, all of the elements of our business model. And so the first tool that I'm going to provide you with, and you're going to get a link that has a workbook in an Excel format that has all of these, as well as a workbook in a PDF format that describes all of these. So I'm going to go through them fairly quickly, but I'm going to describe them. And I'd like you to, as I go through these 8, I'd like you to think about which element of your business model is most under threat? Which is the area of your business model that you think is most important for you to start rethinking now and reimagining now? The first could be your positioning, which is who your core customer is and what your value proposition to them is. In COVID, are you potentially going to have to change who your core customer is or change the value that you deliver to them? Is it your product or service, not just your core product or service, but also all the ancillary products or services, like how they get information, how they get pricing, how they pay, what kind of customer service you provide, information, all of the elements around your product or service? Is that going to have to change? What about your pricing model? Maybe you're charging per unit, and maybe you should start considering charging per hour or charging a membership fee or a freemium model, right? Is it your pricing structure that maybe you need to rethink? Is it your placement, which is how you distribute your value proposition, how you distribute your product or service? And right now we're all locked inside. If you have a business that depends on people coming into your physical space, obviously at this moment, that's going to have to change. I think that the recovery is going to be slow, that it's going to take a year, year and a half, 2 years before we are fully back to normal, and that normal is going to be different. So we're going to start being able to go back to distributing the way we were distributing in some businesses, but not for a while. So what about placement? Is that an area that you need to rethink now? Promotion is your marketing and sales strategy. Think about your funnel. How do you get people into the funnel aware? How do you get them to consider you? How do you get them to try you? How do you get them to be loyal? How do you get them to refer other people? Going through that funnel, you have a set of strategies in place that have worked, but now maybe they won't work or won't work in the same way. So is promotion something that you should be rethinking? What about processes, your internal processes, your operations, your key processes, like how you manage finances, how you manage production, how you track your KPIs, right? Do those processes need to be rethought? What about the physical experience of your product or service? What your customer sees, smells, hears, tastes, touches when they interact with you, the customer journey, if you will. And then the 8th one is people. I put it at the bottom, not because it's the least important, because it's increasingly the most important. How do we hire? Who do we recruit? How do we incentivize? How do we organize? What are our cultural norms? You can kind of think of it as that the positioning is the North Star. when you really know who your core customer is and what your value proposition is, then you can customize your product pricing, placement, promotion processes, physical experience to really focus on that core customer. And then you actuate it through your people policies. So what I'd like you to do now is, because we can kind of jump around a little bit and focus on one of these. If you looked at your business through these 8 lenses, I'd like you to type into the chat and tell us, which area of your business do you think is most important for you to rethink now? Maybe because it's under threat and you need to change it, or maybe because there's a new opportunity that you now have that you want to pursue. So if you could just type in which of these P's.
Yep, product.
Yep.
Process, promotion, people, promotion.
Right. So we have a few more to chime in. Placement and promotion.
There's three choices.
And positioning. Yep. But that's kind of like a marketing, lens, right? Knowing who our customer is, how do we get them, how do we serve them, processes and people, promotion. So I'm seeing a lot of promotion. So maybe we will, physical experience, maybe we'll focus there. So keep typing in here as I introduce you to the next step, and we will, and then we'll dive more in. So right now, looking like promotion, and if you haven't typed in yet, please do so. So now you've sat down and you've thought, okay, we really need to focus on promotion, or we really need to focus on process, or whatever that is. And now we want to ideate potential strategies. And the question here is, how do great strategists come up with winning moves? Alexandra Kostanuik, the reigning women's world chess champion, what she'll do as a marketing stunt is challenge a whole town to play chess. She'll line them up. She'll go from one board to the next each time she sees that winning move. And while she's making those rounds, you might be sitting there looking at the table, asking yourself, what's Alexandra going to do? And you won't see it. And yet, like that, she can see it. She's going to win all of these games. How does she do that? Well, it's because she doesn't use logic. Instead, she uses patterns, that she recognizes more patterns, so she sees more options. Master chess players recognize twice as many patterns as experts, and grandmasters recognize 10 times as many. So I believe that there are 36 fundamental strategic patterns. And in the workbook that you'll have a description of all of these 36. I won't go into, I could talk about these 36 for a long time, but what I do is I look at companies and I look at how they talk about their strategy. And I start looking for emerging patterns. So like in 1970, after Dick Fosbury went over backward, if you started noticing that people who go over the high bar higher, they keep repeating words like Fosbury flop, you'd want to know what that means, right? Because that represents a strategic pattern that you can apply and also start, jumping higher. So what I'm going to show you are a set of patterns that you can apply to brainstorm. I think that what we'll do is I'm going to just jump. I'm just going to jump for a moment, and I'm just going to describe to you. So there are 36 patterns, right? There are 5 patterns that are generally important right now that represent how Amazon and Google and Netflix and Alibaba and Tencent, how they think. And those 5 are these, that they talk about narrative 22, moving early to the next battleground. They talk about coordinating the uncoordinated. They talk about forcing a 2-front battle, being good, and creating something out of nothing. So I'm just going to touch on 3 of these, and then we're going to go into the ones that are particularly for promotion. Certainly, one that is relevant right now for all of us is move early to the next battleground, which says skate to where the puck is going, not where it's been, right? And the reason this is important is because cycle times are increasing. The future is getting here more quickly. And with COVID, the future's it's the great accelerator. It's getting us there even more quickly. But it's not necessarily that it's getting us to a different future. It just is the future that was coming maybe 10 years from now might be coming much more quickly. Adoption of technology has been accelerating. On the left-hand side of this, you see the dark blues are older technologies like the telephone and TV, and you can see how slowly they rose to achieve 80% adoption by US households. And on the right-hand side, the redder lines, you have things like the smartphone and social media. And so what we've been seeing this trend happen for a long time. But what it means is that there is an opportunity for those of us who are willing to play in the next battleground. There was a second generation pharmacist, and he noticed that people were having, with multiple prescriptions, were having a difficult time at grocery stores. And he said, you know, the way that the experience is broken because they have to take multiple trips to the grocery store, to the pharmacy. They've got different bottles. They get confused. Compliance is low. He said, the way it should work in the future is you should get all of your pills delivered once a month in a roll. On the top right, the top corner over here, you see a little pack. It says 8 a.m. on Monday. That little plastic pack contains the pills that you need to take at 8 a.m. on Monday. So he designed this system. Over the next 6 years, he went through the process to get regulatory approval in 48 states, and then he sold it to Amazon for just under $1 billion. So $1 billion in revenue generation simply by this simple thinking of where is the next battleground and what could we do to move there early. Does that make sense? The next,
I use that pill pack for my vitamins.
Yeah, there you go. Awesome. Yeah, it's a great model. And I think that that's going to position Amazon now. They've bought the next battleground. And I think they can very well be the largest healthcare company in the world soon, and to a great extent because of that acquisition. Another helpful one for you to think about is be good. I think that's especially important now, which is that we have been for a long time moving away from the paradigm in which companies existed just to make money for shareholders. People are realizing that by just focusing on profit growth, that we create resistance to our growth, which then diminishes our growth. And so a smarter strategy is one in which your growth is good for the community, for employees, for the government, the country, the environment, the world. So I'm not saying is, whereas corporate social responsibility used to be, if you make money, it's a good idea to give some away. Now what we're saying is, what the smart thing to do is to do good in the world. And so it doesn't mean that you need to make less money. It means that you just show that your growth is good for the world. You no longer choose. CEO of MasterCard, Ajay Banga, he has really aligned the company behind the idea that it is a force for good in the world. And what he's saying is our mission is to create a world beyond cash and turn 90% of transactions that are still cash into electronic transactions, and we'll make a lot of money from that. But the world beyond cash is a better world because drug dealers aren't going to sell drugs to your child without that being traceable. It creates accountability. It creates transparency. It is a better world. I'm a first generation, citizen. My wife is as well. Our parents didn't translate very strong financial literacy to us. You know, for a big period of time, I lived on food stamps, and I've really tried to prevent the lack of financial literacy from translating to my children. We're doing fine financially now, but it took us a while to really get our heads around it. So I started buying them these. My son's birthday was yesterday, and I bought him a $50 stockpile certificate. It's a gift card, and he goes online to stockpile.com and he can buy stock. He can buy $50 of Berkshire Hathaway, even though Berkshire Hathaway costs $250,000. And my daughter's put all her money on Amazon. My youngest son has diversified between Berkshire Hathaway and Amazon. And now they have these great conversations about the stock market and how it's performing. And it is a beautiful way to create good. Now they're doing this profitably, but they're doing it for a purpose, which is financial literacy. And then the last one I'll show you, and then we'll go to the ones that are particular for promotion, perhaps. Create something out of nothing is a really powerful one. It basically says that we tend to play the game of business following a rule that doesn't exist. We play the game like chess, and the rule in chess is you can't take a queen out of your back pocket and put it next to my king, right? You can't add new pieces to the board. But in some countries in Asia, the analog to chess is Go. And in Go, the rules are the opposite. In Go, you cannot move the pieces. You can only add or remove pieces. So what would you like to add to the game? You could add a customer. Tony Fernandez was an accountant. He bought an airline for 27 cents in 2001 because it was bankrupt. And now it's the second largest discount airline in the world, because his core idea was, we won't compete for airline customers. We're going to compete for non-airline customers, railroad customers. And he aligned all of the P's that we talked about around serving that customer. So who is a customer that's not currently in the market? Another one of my friends and clients, Julie Copeland, she has a company that sells safety equipment like hazmat suits and safety gloves, very low margin business. So when she applied this, she said, what would it look like to create a category called safety? And she came with this idea of saying, we're going to bundle safety equipment with OSHA compliance consulting, with safety training. We'll wrap it up into one thing that we call safety care. Within 6 months, it was 10% of their revenue. It's much more of that now. But more importantly, it's a much higher margin business because she's not selling to the purchasing manager who only cares about price. She's selling to the CFO. So could you create a new category? What would you like to add to the game? What new customers, occasions, what new categories, what new needs? So hopefully these start giving you some ideas. We'll get to questions in a moment. I've got more slides to show you, but I want to show you also, orient you to what you'll find in the workbook. In the Excel version of the workbook, you're going to see, what I did was I took all of the 36 patterns and I said, depending on the area of your business that you want to focus on, which would be the 5 that are most helpful to focus on. And since many people mentioned promotion, let's go to promotion here. So promotion is, there are these 5, 13, 20, 21, 6, and 28. And one is appeal to a key weakness or desire. What is that most, what is the most, the customer need that your customers care the most about? What is like their hair is burning and they need to get their hair to stop burning? And how could you focus your promotion activities just on that? Because before COVID, you might have been appealing to many desires. Now you want to appeal to the most critical one. Sacrifice one front to win another. So what are promotional tactics that we should start abandoning so that we can invest in higher return tactics? So you can take all of your promotion tactics and estimate what is our return on that marketing spend, right? Like we advertise on LinkedIn, we do workshops, we do cold calls. How many clients do we get from that? How much revenue we get from that? How much time do we put in that? And actually, like, what is the ROI of those returns? And now might be a good time to get rid of half of your promotional tactics and focus them on the really highly performing ones. Reveal your strategy. What would happen if we authentically revealed our strategy or offer, right? And this fits to being good. What would happen if we kind of really laid open what our goal was? Find a third party to influence. Who has influence on our core customer? And how can we create new promotion partnerships to promote through them? So maybe if your customer buys accounting services from you, they might also buy legal services from someone else. They might also buy patenting services from someone else. How can we start partnering with those people to share their road to the customer? And then send the covert message, which is, what is the secret message that we can direct at non-customer targets so that we can deliver the real customer to our true target? This is a lot like movies where they create a movie for children, but they have messages embedded in that also communicate to adults. This is going to be entertaining. This is going to be fun. So thinking about what that secret message is. So after you do that, I'm just going to wrap up and just describe to you what you do with these ideas. I would spend maybe 7 minutes on each pattern, try to generate 40 or 50 ideas. It's very common that you generate 100 ideas. And then the final step is selecting the 4th option. And this is where kind of the rubber hits the road, because the 4th option, if it makes your competitors ignore and laugh at you, it's going to make your team want to ignore and laugh at that idea as well. That's the dilemma of innovation. The 4th option will at first seem impossible. Impossible is a word found only in the Dictionary of Fools, is what Napoleon said. So a very simple thing you can do is take a tip from Albert Einstein, who said, it's not that I'm so smart, it's just that I stay with problems longer. So that fourth option, before you run off to execute, we want to sit with that fourth option. And a very easy way to do this is take all of your 40 or 50 ideas and you plot them on a matrix. You can have Post-it notes, you can put up a whiteboard, and you can plot them and say, is this easy or difficult? And if we did it successfully, would it be high or low impact? And then you end up with 4 different types of ideas. You end up with waste of time ideas. And you're going to find there are things that you're currently doing that are actually waste of time. You get rid of those. You'll hopefully end up with a nice long list of tactics. You can pull off one every week and or every month and just go and execute them. You may find some winning moves, but what we find is the fourth option usually appears in the fourth quadrant. It appears to be a crazy idea. So in your workbook, what it invites you to do is pick that crazy idea and work on it. You do that systematically by breaking down what are the 3 things that make us believe that this is difficult. What are the 3 big barriers? Like the technology doesn't exist, it costs too much, customers won't want it. And then what are 3 things that we can do to remove that barrier? That is what typically produces the fourth option. So I'm going to leave here with these 3 steps. Choose a leverage point, brainstorm options, and select a fourth option. And I wanted to leave as much time as possible for questions and dialogue. I've got tons of content that I can dive into, but I'll make sure that the time that I'm spending with you is as valuable as possible.
That's awesome. And if you think through this, kind of defense strategy and then getting to reset, a lot of this has to do with what is the reset going to look like? Yep. So any questions that you may have, because we're all kind of thinking about these things. Some of us are acting on them already. Some of us are a little bit behind. But what are you thinking about? What's on your mind? Put that in the Q&A box and we'll have Kaihan kind of answer that. Let me ask you a question while that's coming in. You've had to pivot, right? So you've made some, so you just had a big online, talk about that.
Yeah, we just had an online, so we were sitting here, I remember we were going back in the timeline. It was Friday the 13th. I'm sitting in my office with my colleague, Zach, and we just got the 6th speech canceled. You and I were supposed to be in London or in the UK together, right? That was canceled. I was supposed to be in Malaysia. I was supposed to be in London for something else. I had all these speeches lined up and it was all canceled. And so we said, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? And so we said, what we're going to do is we're going to put together a summit. We're going to start reaching out to speakers whose calendars are suddenly available. We're going to organize a 2-day, 20 speech summit, 1 hour, back to back to back to back for 10 hours each. And we got Paul Krugman, the Nobel Prize winning economist. We had Liz Weissman. We had Rita McGrath. We had Whitney Johnson, just amazing speakers who were going to donate their time. Now, all of the proceeds from that now go to charity. So we're not making any profit from it, but we're getting to do something good. We are developing relationships with speakers. We're blowing up our audience. We had 2,000 people register. We're going to do it now again on May 6th. And we have Amy Edmondson, Rosabeth Moss-Cantor, we have Scott Anthony, and we've got 10 other speakers, 24 speeches over 24 hours around the world. And it's pushing us to where we were going anyway, which is digital experiences. And now our audience is like multiple times larger than what it was before.
I think that's a good way to, and we got some questions coming in I want you to get to. That's a good way to think about this, is it's pushing where you needed to go anyway, right?
Yeah. Yes.
I was on a call this morning and John Ratliff, who runs the coaching organization with Scaling Up, was on there, and we were talking through some messaging for Vern and some of the stuff that he was working on. And the comment that John made was 2X, the kind of old mystical 2X to 10X thinking. 2X is just doubling in revenue. What does that look like? It's very easy to think through. 10X is exponential, obviously. And at the same time, the old kind of mantra with that is you couldn't drag the past into the future when you 10X. And now we have the past, just for most companies, got destroyed or at least disrupted. So you have this like beautiful opportunity to think about really, really big things, and 10X stuff being really kind of easier than it was just a month ago.
Yeah. And I think, it's interesting because, often you have to go back to go forward. Often it will look like shrinking, and maybe you're experiencing shrinking, but it gives you a new starting point. I think something that Vern said at our summit that really stuck with me, he says, Right now, it should be about movement. Get clarity and start moving. It doesn't mean that you keep ramping up to the 10x vision. Maybe you need to move backward, but what you want right now is movement.
That's awesome. Yeah. You got a couple of questions. Can you see those?
Yep, I can see them. We have manufacturing capabilities, but our core market, live events, has been decimated and probably won't bounce back quickly. So we can make a lot of stuff, but we are trying to think through what should we be making, from Matthew Bullock. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's really interesting. What you can do is, if you think about the future, because right now there's more uncertainty in the future, but typically your near term is certain, your long term is less certain. At this moment in time, it's reversed. The near term is uncertain. But the longer term, what it might look like 3, 4, 5 years ago, that is more certain. So what's helpful to do is like come up with a scenario for the long term. Think about what are the 2 big trends that could shape things, like for digital events, live events. One scenario will be people are so hungry to get back together in person that we're going to start seeing the coming back of live events. Another scenario is people have realized that digital remote is so effective that it never comes back, right? And then you could pick the other dimension, right? Which is what really matters is content, having great content, or what really matters is the ability to digitally deliver it in a dynamic way, right? You do that, you end up with 4 different scenarios, and you can sit with each scenario and plan out which one, and that will help you inform kind of what you should do now in the near term. But stepping out into the future, that's kind of our value proposition and at Outthinker, is step into the future, execute with clarity. Make the time to step out into the future. That might help inform what we should be making. I'm a sole proprietor and I struggle with the online part of business, which I'm doing. But looking at what's out there, how do I catch up in my field, which is saturated with digital content? Yeah, Katie Barnes. You know, I would highly suggest.
Yeah, she's in health and fitness in here.
Yeah, and she's in health and fitness. Yeah. Yeah, you know, I would look really at one of the speakers in our thing, and is in our summit, was Bharat Anand. I'm going to just type it in over here, Bharat Anand, and if you look him up and just look up Harvard as well, you'll find some articles that he's written. He is responsible. He has been responsible for all of Harvard's digital learning, and now he is, you know, leading this mass transition to digital. But he makes a point that digital it requires a different mindset, that when you're doing in person, it is a hub and spoke model. I have content and I distribute it to you. But what we overlook is the spoke to spoke interaction and creating value from that. Like the first part of newspapers to be disrupted were the classified ads. And that was because classified ad is really about spoke to spoke, people connecting with each other. So there are a lot of things that we're not doing right now as we do online that Zoom actually doesn't allow very easily, but you know, he talks about what you need to do to make that a more effective experience. Polling, cold calling, chat, a Slack channel that allows asynchronous interaction outside of it, you know? And I'm sure, I mean, I'm not saying anything new to you, but you know that Pelotons are flying off the roof, and you are out the door, and you can't get them. So remote digital delivery. I'm doing yoga with Adrian, and I found out she has a community of 90,000 members on her. She used Mighty Networks instead of Slack, and they have 90,000 members on that are paying like $9 a day a month. That's the kind of like spoke to spoke kind of stuff, you know? How will the workbook and spreadsheet be sent to us, or is somewhere we can get new information? Andy's going to send out a link to you, and you can download this presentation. You can download the workbook in PDF format. And also I created a workbook in Excel format that allows you to, with a coach or on your own, go through it step by step.
Any other questions you want to, let's see, anything else you guys need to ask? You got the man here. This pivot point is, making good decisions around it. I wonder, do you need to completely understand everything before you start moving? Bern said, just move. Talk to us a little bit about, I have this kind of internal mantra, 70%. If I have 70% of the information and I have 70% of the gut feel, I kind of take action, right? So
yeah, like in high risk environments, I think it was Colin Powell that said that as well. Like if you wait for 80% of the information or get to 80% of confidence, then you've probably waited too long. You need to start moving with less confidence. But there's a way to do that through very inexpensive, frugal experiments. So two quick stories. One is I was reading a book on luck, and that's kind of what gave me the courage to try this summit. And in this book, the author was describing a moment where she needed to get on a train. The train was pulling into the station in 1 minute. The escalator was broken, and she spoke to the person working at the train station. They said she'd have to walk all the way around to the other side and go down this other escalator. And her first thought was, I'm never going to have time to get there. But then she thought, well, I consider myself a lucky person, so let me try. And so she booked it and she ran around and she got on her train. So luck is self-fulfilling. When we think that we're not lucky, we don't take action, and that reinforces that we missed the opportunity. So taking action, now. And a way to reduce that risk is to make inexpensive experiments. Like when Lee Iacocca, his team suggested that they release the first convertible version of the Sebring. This is, way back when. And they were going to invest millions of dollars in a marketing campaign and study. And he said, how about before we do that, let's just take an existing Sebring, let's cut off the roof and drive it around and see if people like it. When HP developed the first digital calculator, the marketing study said that there's not any market for this because people already had slide rules. Why would someone pay more for a digital calculator when they can get a slide rule at a much lower price point? But what do? They took action. They made 1,000 of them, they put them out, and before they knew it, they were selling 1,000 a day. So get tons of experience of this, but if you look up a frugal innovation, I'll write that in here, a guy named Navi, I won't spell his last name. If you just Google Navi and frugal innovation, you'll find a great article on Fast Company he wrote recently with some inspiration on how to reduce the risk of taking action by finding creative ways to make inexpensive experiments.
And you've got another question here from Mr. Gallant.
Yeah. What is the pivot you have seen so far that surprised you the most in terms of either its creativity or stupidity? Well, I love the story of Slack. I don't know if you know, but Slack was a company that they're a video game company. They developed these like video games, and the company almost failed. And they were going to go bankrupt. They were running out of cash. They were going to fire all their employees. And they just looked around. They said, okay, what do we have that we could maybe turn into a product? And they had developed this interactive tool that their teams use just to manage projects. And they said, okay, let's take that and let's polish it up and let's see if we can launch that as a product. Now, Slack is hugely successful, right? I think that's a great example of a pivot. In my book, Outthink the Competition, I write about that Netflix, this was written 10 years ago, and I wrote Netflix is probably going to go bankrupt because their model is based off of being the middleman, being the place where you can search for content. And now people are going to be able to search for free. And that's why, Orbitz and Travelocity, why their businesses really went down. They had to pivot. And, I said that they're probably not going to make this pivot, but what they need to do is they need to focus on content. And I don't take any, I don't claim any responsibility for this, but they did pivot their model. They started investing in owning content and, House of Cards and the rest. And they are really good at pivoting,
Arnie's got a question here as well.
Hey, Arnie. Well, he's seen me do this a few times.
Yeah.
So I've done this with, I wouldn't do, 6 is supposedly the magic number.
So the question is, how many people is too many or too little?
How many people are too many, too little when you do this methodology? So when people are ideating, 6 is about the right number, 5 to 7. If you go above that, there's not enough airtime for people. You can go bigger than that. I've done this for as many as 250 people, and we had tables of 6 or 7 people. I got to do this with ABC networks, and it was what we did was they had I'm bragging a little bit here because this is such an awesome opportunity. It's not like I get to do this all the time. So, but they had head of daytime, head of news, head of, head of comedy. They had the head of production. They had head of marketing, head of digital, right? And what we did was we broke them up into teams of 5 to 7, and we had our programming table. We had our distribution table. We had our pricing table, right? And they went through the process. They each generated their ideas. They each did their 2x2 matrix. Then they came up with their top 10. And then each table stood up and shared their top 10. That then became a master list that we then all voted on. So that's a great way to allow more people in your organization to contribute and participate while not breaking this rule of not having more than 7 people brainstorming at once.
Yeah, you do it in small groups and bring it back and put it into one big list.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Great.
Let's see. So let me ask you about this. We've got a couple more minutes. And earlier you made the comment 12 to 24 months before we're kind of back to doing business the way we did business 60 days ago. You're I'll say worldly. You got a lot of contacts. You're talking to a lot of people. You're very well informed. So just give me your overall opinion of 2 things. Talk more about this 12 to 24 months thing. And then we're kind of in this stage right now in this thing, Kaihan, around how the hell do we get people outside now? And, I've heard everything from apps on your phone that allow you to leave to, antibody testing to bracelets, green, yellow, red. So give me your thoughts and tell us what you think is going to happen.
Yeah. And I feel like I know a little bit more than some people right now, just because we just did this summit. I'm not an expert, but I'll kind of tell you what I heard that I found.
That's perfect.
So Paul Krugman, the Nobel Prize winning economist, he was talking about, people have been talking about, is this going to be a V recovery, like a quick recovery, a W recovery? We come up and then we have a second wave. Is it going to be an L recovery, which is no recovery? He said, I think it's going to look a lot more like a Nike swoosh. So it's going to drop and it's going to take a long time for us to come back. But what's different about this economic crisis than any other economic crisis is that it's not driven by demand. It's not that people don't have money to spend. It's that they can't get outside to spend it, So once we start opening up, then demand will come back and the economy will come back. The problem will be, where can we open up? Where is, New York State has more cases now than any other country in the world, more than China had, more than Italy has, more than Spain has, just in New York State. If we can contain, I live right outside of New York, if we can contain it and then we can start testing, then we can start opening up, but we're not going to be the whole nation opening up. It's going to be, pockets opening up. That requires us complying with social distancing and us being diligent and figuring out how to test people, and then there's some places that maybe won't recover. There'll be some industries where the economics are so bad, they've already been in a decline, their margins are so slow, they can't afford to go a few months without revenue, right? Scott Galloway, my favorite line from him was, anything with an escalator is dead. Macy's, dead, right? Then they've laid off, so many people, right? So anything that depends on, any business that depends on bringing large groups of people together is going to be in trouble. And if that business right now is financially strong, it can weather the storm to get out of the Nike swoosh. If it runs out of cash, then it's probably not coming back, But I think that, a lot of this is just driving us to where we were going anyway. And it's a great opportunity for us to get there early.
Sarah's got a give me some advice question in there. It's pretty good, actually.
All right, looking for advice. Catering company was $3 million in revenue, evaporated. I am doing home meal delivery service, not enough volume or revenue. I have 4,500 square foot warehouse, 6 people on staff, lots of connections. What's 150 PPP?
$150,000 in payroll protection.
Payroll protection loan to invest in labor for the pivot. Any suggestions? Yeah. Well, after this, I'm going to get on a call with a client that I'm on the advisory board of, and they sell frozen food. They import it, they package it, and then they sell it. Unfortunately, 80% of their distribution was to food service, and that's, completely gone. So we're going to be talking about that, but I'm just making this up right now. But I would really look at, Peter Drucker says, strategy is about what business you're in. And in the back of your mind, you and your teams have this idea that we are in the X business. Tony Hsieh said, we really took off at Zappos when we realized we're not in the shoe business. We're in the customer service business, and we happen to sell shoes. At a EMP program, I got to hear Howard Bihar, the president, kind of right-hand man to Howard Schultz at Starbucks. And he said, we really took off when we realized we're not in the business of selling coffee. We're in the people business. We serve our employees. So I would really try to rip off the idea that you are a catering company for right now. You were some kind of company that happened to do catering. And you have this asset, these 4,500 square feet. You have this staff. You have a loan to cover their salaries. And you put those things together without the catering lens and say, what business could we create from this? Goes back to Slack, right? Look at what we have and what could we create out of nothing from that. I don't have a specific idea, but I think that would be a useful thinking process. That makes sense.
Absolutely. And then at the same time, the ability, right now, you're not starting from zero. So she has assets.
Yeah.
Some of that might be, cumbersome for her to make those decisions. And some of them might be helpful for her to make those decisions, but it's not like you just wake up one day and you have to invent something to go do. You have this.
Yes. The relationships, the brand equity, the trust. I mean, when you started, you didn't have all that. You got a real head start right now. If you started with all that elements of a head start now, what could you turn that into? And really like rip off the catering lens and just ideate. And the thing that's the pattern of two-front battle, where, and I see increasingly successful companies don't define themselves by their industry. They define themselves by something else that hasn't behaved differently. The thing is that we've grown up calling ourselves X industry for so long, it's become our identity. And if it's uncomfortable to take that off because it feels inconsistent with our identity. But if you can just give yourself permission for an hour to brainstorm 10 or 20 or 30 crazy things that you could do outside of catering and just hold off judgment on them, put them up, and then really sit with them and allow yourself the freedom to really sit with it like Albert Einstein says, stay with the problem a little bit longer and just envision what that might look like.
That's a good spot. Well, thanks for sharing all that. We do have workshops that help with this. So we have pivot planning workshops this week. And we also have the CARES Act PPP program workshops what we're finding is a lot of people understand PPP and they've done some of the work, but what they're not looking at is how do I prepare to make sure I get the actual forgiveness, and then how do I use the dollars, which is, kind of Sarah's question. So we're addressing those in a couple of workshops, and you can find those at petracoach.com. If you need some help with any of this stuff as an audience, please reach out, send us an email to info@petracoach.com. And then Kaihan, we have, I was in St. Louis about 2 months ago, and I did a workshop around No Try Life, where we're doing personal plans for a group of about 50 entrepreneurs. Front row, very center, there was a woman there, and her little name tag on her jacket said Tiny Superheroes. That's the name of her company. And so halfway through the day, I'm like, what the hell is Tiny Superheroes? You got to tell me about it. So she said, what we do is we put little capes, little superhero capes.
Nice.
They package them up in these little packages, and they send them to kids that are dealing with disability and disease. And she gets about 100 kids a day sign up on her website wanting these capes. And they, she said, my mission is to change the way people look at child disability. And I said, look, there's 50 other people in here that are doing businesses and doing stuff, but you got the really important thing in the room. What can I do to help? And that day I committed to help her get 2,500 of these on 2,500 kids. So there's ways for people to sponsor for that. If you just go to tinysuperheroes.com/PetraCoach, you can sponsor some capes. And for you being here today, we're going to sponsor some capes for some of these kids because they need it, especially in this time. So I appreciate you being here.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
And always a good friend, man. Maybe we'll get back to London very soon.
Yeah, we'll do it.
All right.
All right.
See ya.
See you.